Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We're on location this week visiting Peter Acworth, founder and CEO of Kink.com, here at the iconic San Francisco National Guard Armory and Arsenal on the corner of Mission and 14th Streets. This once abandoned National Historic Landmark is now a busy production studio for B&D videos that represent the more controversial reaches of the booming online pornography business. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Peter, you've achieved fame and fortune as the proprietor of a highly successful fetish adult entertainment website. According to your biography, you're the son of a sculptor and former Jesuit priest. How did this influence your life?
Good question. I would say that being brought up in that sort of environment, sex was not a topic. Nobody talked about sex. Mm-hmm. There was obviously no internet, no access to sort of adult materials whatsoever. And I grew up kinky. I mean, I was someone that was fantasized heavily about bondage, about S&M.
Is this a very British thing?
I don't know that it's British. I think it's a human thing, to be honest. I remember as a child, I can't have been more than sort of 10 or so. I think walking past a store that sold handcuffs. It was sort of the English equivalent of a weapon store. I mean, no guns, but there were handcuffs in the window. And I remember sort of fantasizing about them age sort of 10, having them used on myself.
So something patterned you at an early age.
Yes, and I don't know exactly whether it's genetic or whether it's something to do with my upbringing. But I mean, I remember it was a very loving household. I had a good upbringing.
Relations with your parents.
I did well at school. I went to Cambridge, but I was always terrified of the opposite sex and didn't lose my virginity until I was 21 or so, and always been very kinky.
So you're a Cambridge man, not an Oxford man. I know there's a big difference between the two. Tell us a little bit about your experience there.
Yeah, Cambridge. I mean, I was there for 3 years. I very much enjoyed mathematics. I mean, mathematics and porn were my two big interests in life. The college I was at was very male-dominated. It was, very scientific college and very mathematical college at Cambridge. So I think it was sort of 70-something or 80% men.
Sure.
And after that, I left and I went to business school in France and then latterly to the States to do a PhD in finance. So I was very much on an academic track before I got into this.
Sure. And of course, now you're a big name in the adult entertainment business. Just to give some scope to it, how big is adult entertainment in the U.S., and how many Americans watch adult content on any kind of a regular basis?
There's been various estimates as to how big it is as an industry, and it's very difficult to tell because the companies are largely privately owned.
Sure. Nobody publicly reports.
No bigger companies want to acquire those companies in the adult entertainment business because they don't want them in their portfolio. So there's a lot of secrecy and a lot of it's quite difficult to tell how big the industry really is. But it's certainly into the billions. And I think now with the availability of free content, which I guess we'll probably get back to that later, but with the availability of free content now, I mean, I think most people watch it, to be honest.
So your filming operation here in San Francisco operates under some very strict talent recruitment, compensation, and management policies that have won you accolades in the business. Share some of your business philosophy with us.
I would say that we're a company that believes in treating people with respect, and we want to treat the models well. In my sort of late 20s and early 30s, I started to sort of get into the BDSM scene, and part of playing in the BDSM scene is it's all about negotiation and being very upfront about what you're going to do and consent. And we've really attempted to apply that sort of same philosophy to the way we do business here. In advance of any shoot, we have the models sign off on all the things that are going to happen during the shoot, and then after the shoot's complete, we do an interview with the model and see what worked and what didn't work.
That was kind of a breakthrough, wasn't it? Particularly when it comes to censorship and a lot of the pornography prosecution that had gone on for a while.
Yes, we were definitely on sort of the cutting edge of that. I remember a time when, it was debatable whether one could produce material that had bondage and penetration. In other words, someone tied up and having sex, which is obviously, that people that are into it, that's what they do. It is a sexual thing for them. So there was a debate as to whether one could actually publish that. So we went ahead and did that anyway. And our billing company sort of questioned us on it, but the fact that we had interviews beforehand and interviews afterwards, it clearly wasn't...
made it clear that it was a performance.
Well, exactly, yes. So it made it clear that it was a performance, and as a result, it was fine. And, latterly, other companies started doing the same, and now it's sort of established that it's...
Become an industry standard.
It's become an industry standard. It's become legal, yeah.
How many people do you have working for you here at the Armory?
We have about 120 people working in total here. we have quite an IT department, marketing people, obviously, and about half the company is production.
Mm-hmm. How do you see your business position with respect to the feminist anti-pornography movement?
Definitely, we've had some heat from that. For instance, we hosted an event here. We have this fabulous drill court downstairs, some 40,000 square feet, and we held a book fair there called the Anarchist Book Fair. And there was a lady by the name of Gail Dines who was going to come to this book fair and present, but didn't because of the business here, in the other half of the building. So the people that are vehemently in the sort of second wave feminist movement vehemently against what we do. But sort of the third wave feminists are much more
open about it.
It's all about, choice, that women should have a choice to be in this business if they want.
Your business operates primarily with a subscription model?
Yes, 70 to 80% subscription, so you'll join and then we build again, although we do sell shoots individually too now.
I mean, I understand it's a private business, but can you share some statistics with us if you can? Number of subscribers, how you're doing on the economic front?
We've been a company that's hovered around the sort of 30 million or so in total sales mark. I have to say, business has become tougher more recently. I think the whole industry has suffered somewhat. There's just the availability now of free content out there on the internet. It's tough to keep those numbers.
So how do you compete with the enormous amount of free adult content on the web? What prevents your business from entering the same death spiral as most big city newspapers?
That's a very good question, and a question I ask myself a lot. I mean, the availability of free content now is such that there's so much of it available and it's categorized so well that it's tough to compete. But the ways we're doing so is we're attempting to build a community around our products. So we're attempting to use the recorded content as a way to sell other products and services. For instance, you'll be able to right-click on a shoot and buy the items used in that shoot, the gags, the merchandise. Exactly.
I guess that's how a lot of rock stars do it too, isn't it? The way the music business has changed.
Right.
It's concerts and merchandising.
Right, exactly. Well, interesting you say that. We're in the process with the city to get an event space approved here for inside of this building.
Oh, good Lord.
And we have a bar across the street. So we're sort of diversifying it and attempting to become sort of a lifestyle brand.
Financial payments have always been a challenge in the adult website business due to the high level of fraud and consequent chargebacks. How has Kink managed to retain its own merchant account, which I understand is unusual these days in the adult business?
I think that just through being in the business so long and through managing to keep our chargeback ratio very low, I mean, we have good customer support. We get back to people. We cancel a membership if it was incorrectly billed, and just through having that relationship, I think, with the customer and a close relationship with the banks too. We've worked hard on that.
Well, that raises the question: have you experienced any pressure exerted from regulators acting through your banks? There's something called Operation Choke Point that has been methodically severing the banking relationships of legal yet unfavored businesses. Have you experienced any of that?
It has been. I mean, it's been tough to. I've heard from other people in the industry that it's tough to keep hold of a merchant account, and there's a sort of a throttle in place. So any given merchant bank cannot have more than a certain percentage of business going through adult. And I don't know whether that applies to other industries or we've just been singled out.
What first brought you to San Francisco?
Originally, I sort of perceived San Francisco as being a fetish capital, a place where
I think the whole country thinks of it that way.
Is okay. I mean, it's the home of the fabulous Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I walked into Mr. S. Leather down the road. It's the biggest fetish store I've ever been to. So I perceived it as a place where my business could call it a home. But also I was big into windsurfing and sort of the outdoors life. So it was appealing for those reasons.
So lifestyle, politics, and economics all converged.
All together, yes.
Peter, I imagine it's been a lot of work not only staying compliant with all relevant laws and regulations regarding adult content, but staying out of the crosshairs of overzealous and obscenity prosecutors. Times have changed quite a bit since Phil Harvey, the guest from our first segment, was dragged into court for selling condoms and then adult VCR tapes through the mail. How do you view this evolution in law and cultural mores?
You're right. There definitely has been a change. I mean, the obscenity prosecutions have stopped. We're obviously worried that they might come back under a more conservative administration. A friend of mine, John Stagliano, who runs Evil Angel, recently won an obscenity battle, but it was in the last few years. I mean, it was quite recent. But now we face a new enemy in the form of a group, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, that has been campaigning to put in place very unfair and unreasonable regulations on the industry, which would essentially criminalize the industry.
Well, tell us more about that. I understand this has something to do with condom use in adult films.
Right. So the process has been this, has been to sort of single out one or two performers and have them to give very emotional testimony, which actually isn't based on fact necessarily. Take a performer who we know did not catch HIV on set because we tested the people that person performed with. Have that person give a very emotional performance and attempt to get condoms, not only condoms, but potentially dental dams and goggles enforced on the industry.
Blame the industry.
And blame the industry for something that actually didn't happen.
So, Peter, how many documented cases of HIV transmission have occurred on a regulated adult video set in the U.S. in the past 10 years?
In fact, none. And that may surprise people. We have quite a rigorous process. On the straight side of the industry, everybody is tested. The current regime is every 14 days they have to be retested. And on any set that has followed that process, there hasn't been a single case of transmission on set. And we know that for sure because, again, if someone was to test positive, we can test everybody that they performed with. And in every case, there's been a moratorium. We've tested everyone that person performed with, and we've determined that the rare cases of infections happened off-set and not on-set.
And the industry shuts down if someone tests positive.
Yeah, and the industry shuts down is what we call a moratorium. Someone tests positive, we make sure that nobody in the performing community has been infected, and only then do we continue. And obviously, these moratoriums are taken by those that want to attack the industry as a sign of, there's a big problem. There's an outbreak. There's a problem with public health here. But in fact, it's not the case at all.
But it sounds like industry best practices have solved the problem, at least internally.
That's right. I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a group that is more diligent. You look at other industries such as boxing. When I was at an amateur boxing match the other night, and I literally was practically sprayed with blood. I was sitting on the first row, and you've got to imagine there's transmission risk there. And I don't believe they have 14-day testing in the same way that we do.
This fellow Michael Weinstein seems to be behind this agenda. What is he all about? What's he driving toward?
I wish I knew what he really was driving towards. I mean, it appears he just wants to shut the industry down. I mean, I can't imagine why else he'd be behind regulations such as that. We've just had a standards boards meeting with Cal OSHA, and literally the pitch there is that we need to protect all mucous membranes and treat bodily fluids as if they're infected.
Poison, right?
Yeah, as you would in a hospital. I mean, that's literally the pitch. So I don't know what his end game is. I can only assume that he's backed by people that are just anti-pornography.
Now, LA has passed a regulation, has it not, about condoms on the set?
They have passed the regulation. Obviously, if you see that on a ballot, you're probably going to vote for it.
Sure.
So it's not surprising that it passed. It's subject to appeal, and we're in the process of sort of fighting against that.
And this is statewide, so what happens to the industry if all of California goes this way?
I mean, I think if something as extreme as having to use dental dams comes into place, I mean, clearly the industry is either going to leave or worse still, it's going to go underground. And that then becomes the worst possible outcome for models and for the industry. I mean, essentially, you're dealing with an illegal industry, and companies like mine would just contract out the process of production. And I fear some companies would just ask many fewer questions as to how that material was produced.
So on the same issue, apparently there's a new pill called Truvada that, when taken daily, provides extremely effective protection against contracting HIV. I actually never heard of it until I was doing the research for this show. Why is Michael Weinstein spearheading a campaign against this drug if he's a president of an AIDS foundation?
Well, good question. I mean, if you believe that Michael Weinstein is essentially against sex, is sort of anti-sex, then it would make sense for him to be against porn and to be against this because people it sort of enables promiscuity, which maybe Michael Weinstein thinks is a bad thing. I don't know.
Well, it would be consistent.
It would be consistent, yeah.
What does the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization have to say about Truvada?
They are in favor of it. I mean, the various communities, practically every other AIDS group is massively excited and in favor of this. And it's very exciting because in the future, we think there's going to be an injection you can take once every 3 months, which essentially immunizes you against HIV.
Well, it is a big economic problem, and one that a lot of people motivated to solve.
Yeah, but I think it would probably put AIDS Healthcare Foundation out of business.
So, Peter, we're here at the San Francisco Armory, kind of a unique property. It's a 200,000 square foot 1914 reproduction of a Moorish castle, and it served as a National Guard arsenal into the 1970s. It stood unused for years as planned to redevelop. It met resistance from community activists concerned about gentrification. How did it come into your hands?
That's right. I mean, it was empty for 30-some years. I looked around it. I was shown it by someone who was sort of a location scout, who said, you really must see this building. And I was just blown away by it. It seemed like it had such potential. And so in a very quiet deal behind closed doors, I quietly bought it from the owner, something which actually, by today's standards was a very good price. And the fact that what we were doing, we were production was actually principally permitted in the building. We didn't have to make any structural changes. We were able to start using the building straight away, which was in contrast to every other potential buyer.
I want to tear it down or turn it into condos or whatever.
Yeah, or do any change of use to the building would entail bringing it up to current standards, which is, fire-rated exits, elevator, sprinklers, and we didn't have to do any of that, so it was much, much easier.
How was your business received by the community?
Initially, the business was, I think, feared by the local community. They sort of envisaged that there would be, sex workers out on the street wanting to come in and get work, that we'd be inviting the public in to sort of, participate, that we'd be, a giant strip club, essentially, I think. And, that proved not to be the case. And the minute we started putting the lights on, fixing the windows, putting in 24/7 security, I think the neighbors sort of came to realize that actually it was a good thing for the neighborhood.
Do you plan on staying here, or are you worried that you might be forced out given these new laws?
Well, right now, we are pretty worried. I mean, there's a couple of things going on. The area, the market right now is white hot. So you've got companies wanting to spend, a lot of money to rent space. And at the same time, we're not sure whether the business we run here is going to be legal long term.
Well, I would think just tearing this building down, the land itself must be worth a fortune.
Yeah, well, you can't knock the building down because it's a landmark. You have to basically leave the exterior of the building as is. So whatever it is used for, that has to remain the case.
It has to look like a Moorish castle in a dungeon. So that kind of limits your choice of properties.
Right. Inside you can make changes, but on the exterior it has to stay the same. Yeah.
Peter, we live in a litigious society. We live in a society full of overzealous prosecutors, and yet we're in an era of rapidly changing social mores. How do you see this playing out in the years ahead?
I don't know what the outcome will be of this various regulations that we're facing that are trying to make this industry illegal. We will either prevail, in which case, the industry will continue more or less as it has been, or the business will essentially be made illegal, which is the same as prostitution, in the country.
So I can easily imagine passing laws that make the production of adult content illegal in the United States, but given the First Amendment, I can't imagine seeing the distribution become illegal. Does that pretty much mean the industry will just move overseas?
Yeah, I think companies like mine will, produce in Europe or in South America, places where it's legal, and places where in fact it's actually a good deal cheaper and easier to produce, and they'll just distribute from the United States.
Or perhaps in Cuba. As I recall, Cuba was one of the adult film capitals of the world until the communist revolution there.
Oh, quite possibly. I hadn't considered that, quite possibly.
Peter, as a successful businessman and pioneer at the edge of an industry, you seem to be coming into your own here. You're running a very profitable lifestyle business. What advice do you have for other entrepreneurs who go off the beaten path?
I think just follow your heart. This is something that was very personal to me, and I just sort of did what seemed natural at the time, and I was very passionate about it on a personal level. And I think that would be the advice: just follow your heart and don't let people talk you out of it.
And was it accepted by your family?
Initially, I somewhat jokingly put it on my resume, which had 3 premier schools, followed by CEO of hogtie.com. My parents did thought that it was. I think they were worried that I was going to have a lonely life, that I would feel isolated and be sort of marginalized. And in fact, that was the opposite of what happened. I built a whole sort of community around it, yeah.
So, Peter, thank you for sharing your perspective with us, and thanks for being a guest on the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
That was Peter Acworth, founder and CEO of Kink.com, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Real Clear Radio Hour is produced in conjunction with Real Clear Politics, America's premier independent political website. Real Clear Radio Hour is a not-for-profit, donor-supported program. If you'd like to help us expand, please stop by realclearradio.org and hit the donate button, or contact us to become a corporate supporter. That wraps up our show for this week. Join us next week, same time, same station. See you then.